Well, hello, I'm Jeff Baumgartner, a senior editor at Light Reading and your host for this episode of Signal Strength, a podcast from Light Reading focused on all things broadband, video, and streaming, and also where we break down some of the headlines with an emphasis on the technologies, policies, and other things that are driving them all forward. And in this episode, Susan Johnson, Senior Executive VP of Transformation and Global Supply Chain at AT&T, joins the podcast to provide an update on the company's ambitious copper shutdown project. And as we've been reporting, AT&T has a plan underway to shut down the bulk of its copper infrastructure by 2030. And as we'll learn here, there's a lot of moving parts to this project. And a big one is policy and regulations. And you're going to hear from Susan about how the FCC recently approved another tranche of wire centers for discontinuance. And we've covered a lot of ground as well, including AT&T's wireless first approach to the transition, how fiber will factor into the project further downstream, a few more details about AT&T Phone Advanced, which is the POTS replacement that AT&T has developed for this, and also an update on the sustainability aspects of the project. And for example, what is AT&T doing with the copper it's reclaiming, the facilities it's shutting down, and the energy and the power it's going to be able to redistribute toward other types of services and projects. So again, a lot of moving parts, and Susan helped cover pretty much everything we threw at her. So let's get to it. Well, hey, Susan, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate the chance to connect with you here.
Appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to it, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about a project that I'm sure is like near and dear to your heart, and that is AT&T's initiative to effectively shut down the bulk of its copper infrastructure by 2030. Right now, is this like 100% of your work attention or near it that you're spending on this particular project?
Jeff, it is not 100% of my attention. Started out being probably the majority of my attention, but we've now built a team that is executing against the strategy we've defined, and I'm kind of broadening my scope and doing some other transformational initiatives across AT&T that I'm spending my time on. Okay. I also still manage our supply chain team and doing all of our procurement and logistics delivery all around the world.
Okay. All right. So a lot on the plate. Well, the last time we spoke, I think it was in the fall, the FCC had approved AT&T to discontinue legacy copper in about, I think it was 10% of the footprint, and that was set to take effect in June 2026. But the reason we're talking today is because the FCC approved another tranche, which we'll get into here momentarily. But before we get into that important piece, could I ask you to talk about start with like the major motivations, right, behind the initiative, and maybe a status report on the project, right? So kind of in the wake of the original approval from the FCC, have you already begun to shut down some of the footprint, and you're already transitioning some customers? So kind of motivation plus kind of where you're at.
Yeah, happy to take the question. Thank you, Jeff. I do think it's important we start out on the why, because we are putting a lot of focus on this. And I'll start out with the why being it's all about the customer. You know that we have fiber services that we are delivering in many parts of the U.S., as well as our wireless capabilities that allow high-speed broadband connections. And we are still delivering to a minor amount of customers. Less than 2% are using it today, based on that copper network that is 70 years old. And so I think we touched on the fact that I also run a supply chain for a living. What has happened on a regular basis is companies discontinue technologies when they are upgrading and moving customers to newer technology. That hasn't happened when you talk about this legacy switched copper network because of the fact that it has had a regulatory envelope around it that has limited the ability to really manage that transition of customers to higher speed services. So, back to your question on the why, doesn't matter what I look at, NPS scores are very low for these antiquated copper services, and it's time to upgrade our customers and move them to the new. So we started this process a little over 2 years ago, and we've made a lot of great progress. We have officially powered down our first wire center. So many of your listeners are probably telecom people, but think about a wire center as that post office and the delivery service for a regional area. We have shut down our first wire center, but more importantly, we've really begun to scale the process with the FCC. We now have approval from the FCC to fully discontinue copper-based services in more than 30% of our wire centers, and that'll be effective by the end of 2026. And we have stopped selling new copper-based services in about 85% of our wire centers, which is a term that we refer to as grandfathering. So a lot of progress, laid out the strategy on where we're going, stopped selling those services in 85%. We'll be moving to discontinue in about 30% of our wire centers. And it is all about better meeting customers' needs as we go on this journey to upgrade them to fiber and wireless services that are much more able to deliver that high-speed broadband connection and reliable voice into the home or business.
Okay, and with the shutdown of the first wire center happened, since that's occurred, so when that happens, so that obviously means what, that the customers that were being served off that wire center have been transitioned.
Yeah, correct. We have a
Okay.
process we call migrating customers. And, um, as I said earlier, we've got less than 2% of customers on this. And I guess the other element of the why I'll touch on is for any service, particularly this copper based network, it's a high fixed cost business that was built for 100% of customers, only 2% using it. We have a significant profitability challenge, but more importantly, it's hogging a lot of energy and it's got a lot of elements, network elements we can put to better use. So we have started a process and we're going kind of region by region or wire center by wire center, back to that post office analogy that I laid out, where we are notifying customers and then working with them to install them to our higher speed services for POTS, plain old telephone service, or that traditional telephone line. We're upgrading them to a product we call AT&T Phone Advanced. And for customers that are on DSL, kind of that old service of low-speed copper broadband connectivity, we're upgrading them in many cases to our AT&T Internet Air device, which is fixed wireless, or migrating them to fiber. And so that process goes. And then once we've migrated all the customers in a wire center, we will power it down and decommission the elements.
All right. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a big regulatory envelope around this process, right? And because there's a lot of requirements and other regulatory aspects. Now, as you go through this with the FCC, what do you have to do to to work with them on this, in terms of what do you have to address or show at the commission for them to say, hey, okay, you have the green light now, for this additional portion of the footprint? Because it feels like you have like a template at this point.
Hey, Jeff, I think it's a good question, because I think if you're not understanding the regulatory structure, you look at this and most technology people would say, okay, why are customers even on this anymore?
Yeah, it's like, what's the problem? What's so hard about this?
What's the problem and why is this
Yeah,
taking so long?
like switch them over and let's be done. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
not that easy.
So the process starts at the state basis, where we have worked across 21 of our state footprint to get out of what's called the carrier of last resort. Once that upgrading of the carrier of last resort regulatory envelope at the state occurs, then we start working with the FCC. The FCC needed to get comfortable that for customers that we are disconnecting from a copper-based services, we had a equally priced, equal, or in many cases less expensive device with better service for that customer. And that involved a lot of work with the FCC to have them spend time with our AT&T Phone Advanced product, and they went through a rigorous testing regime. We had latency requirements, availability requirements, and other things that we worked with the FCC to get them comfortable with that product and how it works, and the fact that it supports devices, medical devices in the home, fax machines, elevators, alarm systems, and really wanted to make it that device
Yeah.
that supports everything that is already in a business or a customer home. So the FCC got comfortable with that product after we spent time with them. And now we are in the process of working with the FCC through their process, which includes a filing when we grandfather or stop selling, and then includes a filing when we move to discontinuance. Once the FCC has granted the discontinuance, it becomes effective 12 months after they have granted that. That gives us time for that 12 months to make sure that we, with a pretty customer-centric mindset, as you and I have talked about, Jeff, are talking to our customers, communicating with our customers, notifying our customers, and handling that migration in a sensitive way so that they understand what they're moving to and what the benefits are.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to point out that we're not just talking about a phone line. There are a lot of different systems and services that have been attached, to that legacy POTS infrastructure. And I mean, you made a lot of progress here with the FCC, and it sounds like they've definitely gotten a lot more comfortable with the whole process and what you're doing. Before you get further ahead, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the next steps, right, at the FCC, because obviously you're going to want them to put similar green lights on additional tranches of wire centers. But do you expect that you're going to have to, at this point now, kind of establish like some sort of working track record, that the wire centers, as they get shut down, we're have something to show, like, hey, here's how well we're doing this, and they'll kind of use that as the basis before they approve additional ones. I wasn't sure what the process will be or what you expect it'll be.
Yeah, Jeff, maybe I'll answer that on two different elements. First of all, we have made a pledge that we are not going to leave any customers left behind. We obviously want to follow the FCC rules, but this is really about an AT&T customer-centric mindset, which is regardless of the FCC rules, we don't want to leave customers stranded without access to 911 or voice services. So to your question, making sure that our customers are taken care of and we manage this migration process in a way that doesn't leave customers stranded, they're comfortable with the upgraded service, is really important for us and for the FCC process as we manage these migrations. The process for us is, we talked about the fact that we've got more than a third approved by the FCC now. We actually have a little bit of a two-part strategy going on. We are scaling the discontinuance filings in the areas of the country where we're calling wireless first, where we will be using our fixed wireless and APA products as the upgrade for the customers we're moving off of copper, and we're moving forward in those areas, which is about half of our wireline footprint over the next 2 years, because we've said we are going to exit copper in those areas in 2027. On the other half of the areas of AT&T's footprint, in many cases, we are not going to be making discontinuance filings until the company continues and completes their fiber build. So as an example, if
Ah,
we have a wire center where AT&T is building fiber and the end game is to migrate a customer from a POTS and DSL service to a fiber service and VoIP, we are going to manage that process to be closely timed to our fiber build. And so that half of the country, fiber first, we are taking a longer time and we are not going to be filing for discontinuance. The part we're focused on right now is the half of the wire centers that are in wireless first areas where we're migrating them to our AT&T Phone Advanced product and our AT&T Internet Air product, which are the fixed wireless and wireless or third-party broadband enabled for voice services.
okay. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? Going wireless first in this instance, right? Because it's the easiest to transition, or at least it's what you can transition sooner, right? Because obviously, like you mentioned, when fiber, it takes longer to build and so forth. So I can understand kind of how you'd prioritize it. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Um, Now at the very, let's really quickly talk about California because at the very start of the project, California was not part of the initiative, right? And we talked before that there are discussions going on with regulators and policymakers there. Um, how is that progressing? And what is there like a main sticking point at this stage, or like what's their biggest concern that they bring up that other states have not really brought up, or aren't as concerned about, or feel okay about?
Jeff, yeah, let's talk about California. I think it's an important one. I think just for any of your listeners or readers, I'll first start out and point out that AT&T operates its wireline network in 21 states. We have been successful in getting regulatory freedom in 20 out of the 21 states. California is the one remaining state in our wireline footprint that hasn't modernized or changed these regulations yet. So we are continuing to work with the CPUC to work through a process to try to modernize within California. The other comment I'll make, and then I'll talk about the specifics, is that even though we do not have regulatory freedom from a state level in California, our customers are still, in many cases, voting with their feet, if you will. Our customers are migrating, and we are continuing to see customers on their own voluntarily migrate to our faster services, wireless and fixed wireless and fiber. So that process is continuing. California, what are their concerns? I think it is very much about just concerns about are we going to be able to serve customers without that copper network? Is everyone going to have full voice capability without the copper network? The comment that I will make, Jeff, many of your listeners are fully familiar probably with the BEAD funding rollout to deliver high-speed connectivity.
Mhm.
California is in the process of rolling out and making those awards. I do believe that as this happens, the regulatory concerns about a voice-only POTS line are going to be less meaningful as every household is going to have access to a high-speed broadband connection, which is going to enable us to upgrade customers and I think to really discontinue copper as that fiber or other broadband rolls out through BEAD. I think it'll be less of a concern. In the meantime, we're continuing to work with California and try to address their concerns. But so far, we have not received that regulatory freedom in California.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess as you move ahead with the project in the other states, you'll have something to show them. I guess in terms of how
Yeah, Jeff, and I,
consumers.
I I think the challenge for us, as you
Yeah.
said, we are moving forward in other states. We also went on record their cost of keeping that network up and running is about $1 billion. Wouldn't we all rather put that
Yeah.
$1 billion to better use? So challenged, continuing to work with regulators as we are moving forward in the other states. I think it'll be a really good opportunity for us to show success and make sure that we continue this customer-centric mindset to be able to show California how this will work.
Okay. And I know we're still kind of in the early innings for a lot of this, and we talked about it a few months ago, but what are some of the surprises or maybe lessons learned that you've encountered maybe over the last 3 or 4 months?
Jeff, maybe I'll point on a couple. I think the first thing we said, you and I talked last time, is I live in a tech world, and I probably have been surprised about customers not really understanding the newer technologies and understanding the benefits of the newer technologies. And so we have learned more and more about the importance of communicating with our customers. This isn't about taking something away from customers. It really is about an upgrade, and continuing to make sure we're communicating that you can keep the same phone number. Everything will work in your household the same. Your existing equipment will still function the same way. We really need to continue to communicate that to customers, particularly for some of the more vulnerable customers that are less tech savvy, if you will. That's important for us to message that to them. The second thing I'd point to that you and I talked about is it's been a continual learning about that AT&T is not an island. We cannot just migrate and shut down our copper-based network, because our copper-based network interconnects with all of our peers' networks. And a lot of the interconnection agreements on how we hand off calls and traffic are based in a TDM regulatory structure. So for the peer-to-peer handoff of calls, for the how intercarrier compensation works, and how networks interconnect, a lot of that rules and routing and structure still sits in the antiquated copper-based area. So we have been working across the industry and working with US Telecom to really try to define a date certain for the industry within the US to move off of TDM, and to then redefine how the interconnection rules will work and how we continue to make sure all of our customers are served and we can still interconnect our networks in a way that makes sense. So those are probably the two biggest ones. And then, of course, I joke with my team, the thing I love about this job is, we're always learning new things about stuff that we hadn't thought about. When we go to shut down a central office, and this was a couple months ago, as we've got fewer customers, I mean, it's probably obvious, but a lot of our alarming systems for that central office still sit on the TDM. So whether it's a heat sensor or a door sensor, all of that stuff still sits on TDM. So it's a lot of work to help us manage all of the internal infrastructure for that central office as we're shutting it down, as much as it is the customer-centric process.
Yeah, so you have to extend a lot of different types of ways to kind of bridge across those two technologies. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and I think yeah, you had mentioned a very important thing is to communicate with the customers, and with this new product, the replacement with AT&T Phone Advanced. How has it been working as advertised, and also for those that are getting migrated, is it self install? Is it professional install? Is it a mix? Because I imagine some customers are more tech savvy than others, and not every customer is the same.
Yeah, great question, Jeff. And so I think the first, how do you install it? It is a easy install, where basically you can install it yourself. You and I would probably install it yourself. We are also offering a tech install for customers that are not comfortable with the install. And so we're finding some customers want somebody to come to the home, want to make sure that that install works. Particularly when you've got multiple homes in the multiple phones in the home, and you want to be able to back channel that APA device to make sure that all your existing handsets work and any equipment works. We are doing a install where somebody comes to the home, make sure you get comfortable and everything is up and working. So that's worked really well, particularly for some of our older adults that just want to make sure things work and want someone to handhold them through the process. Is it working? How are we feeling about it? Yes, we're very happy with the performance of the product. We've got really good customer feedback on the product, and I think that we are continuing to add enhancements and capabilities to make sure that the product works well. The device has an antenna on it that gives us an enhanced wireless signal, and we've got the capability to sort of extend that antenna to make sure that it is really augmenting the wireless signal on areas where there is lower wireless coverage. We also are getting good feedback because in many cases, our AT&T Phone Advanced product is less expensive than what customers have been paying for POTS lines. And it is very much ensuring the continuity of service that we promised, and we are feeling good about it, and so far plowing ahead.
Okay. Well, another aspect of POTS, and phone service in general is emergency 911 services. And I did read there was something that AT&T posted not too long ago about supporting these public safety answering points, like the 911 emergency centers that support these older systems. But it talked a little bit about this notion of transitional 911. So is that also tied into the copper project, or is that separate or related? How should we think about that?
It is absolutely integral to our copper shutdown product, Jeff.
Okay.
I didn't talk about the challenges with PSEPs, but I appreciate you asking the question. So, public service access points, as you talked about, we've got many of them in our copper footprint that are sitting on legacy copper interfaces. And so the challenge is that many of these PSEPs may have their own time frame on when they are migrating to the next generation 911 solution. When they migrate to that next gen 911 solution, it is a more reliable service, but more importantly, it's better for a customer trying to reach the 911 center because it enables text and a lot of other capabilities to be able to interface in an IP environment once they fully upgrade the PSAPs. But AT&T designed a product which we're calling Transitional 911 or T911 that moves the PSAP off of that copper infrastructure, moves them to a fiber network, which is more resilient. And that gives us the ability to discontinue the copper network and puts them on their own timeline for when they do that next gen 911 upgrade, but it does migrate them quickly to fiber. So we've got the capability to shut down the copper network.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like another layer, that you have to accommodate. Yeah. Interesting. And when we were talking earlier about the wireless first approach in the this transition, we've been following the Internet Air story, right, in terms of how it's being used and capacity for that. I'm not going to ask you about the Echo Star Spectrum deal and how that applies, but as you move ahead now, has AT&T had to like adjust the mobile capacity plane to accommodate that part of the initiative, to make sure there's enough capacity there for home internet on top of voice and the other aspects? Or are you feeling pretty comfortable, or does the company feel pretty comfortable that there's ample capacity in these markets to do the transition under the wireless model?
Jeff, a good question. Just to be clear, I know you know, but just to make sure all your listeners understand, we've got a lot of voice customers moving to our APA device. That device, voice-centric device, requires very little bandwidth, so very little capacity draw on the network. What you're, of course, asking is for our DSL customers moving to our
Mm-hmm.
fixed wireless AIA. Have we had to think about capacity planning?
Yeah.
Yes, we have. What we've done is we are going, I think, as I said, regionally focused on this. So we are going in on a regional basis. And as we are sending notices to customers about this migration, we are making sure that the capacity is there for them to have the experience that we want them to have. And so that way we have flagged the customer as a migration customer. And we've got the capability to make sure that there's additional capacity. The last thing we want to do is move a customer that isn't going to have a great experience. So we have been watching and managing those customers fairly carefully. Now, having said all that, we have done a lot of modernization to our network with the rollout of our mid-band spectrum across the board, and that has given us a lot of additional capacity with the deployment of the spectrum throughout much of AT&T's footprint. So it has made this whole process a lot easier and ensure that our customers are having that reliable experience as they're upgrading to a fixed wireless product.
Okay. Very good. And, we talked, there's another thing I wanted to bring up, and we talked about it in the fall, but maybe it bears repeating here. So you're taking copper out of the ground and, shutting down facilities, and there is like a sustainability component here, right? In terms of what you're doing with that copper and what happens to those facilities in terms of reuse, monetization. I mean, we can point to what you said in the fall, but maybe just kind of give us a review, kind of how that component fits into the overall project.
Jeff, it's such a good question because I think, as we talked earlier, I also run a supply chain for a living. I think 2026 is going to be the year of supply chain constraints tied to the hyperscaler data center surge.
Mhm.
And whether you look at some of the underlying components that are in our network, or if you look at the energy needs across many regions of the country, things are getting more expensive given that vast growth of AI data centers that is occurring in the level of investment. And so, one of the things that is fantastic about the legacy copper network shutdown is it's better services for our customers, but it's also better for the environment. We are freeing up energy that can be put to better use and offset the challenges to the grid with AI turn up, and it is freeing up critical products like copper that are needed in every electrical circuit and so much of the componentry that we all use in the telecom and the overall AI data center. So we are pulling that copper out and we are reselling that, which has been a moneymaker for AT&T, but also an opportunity for us to put that to better use. So really critical for us as we are turning it down, pulling out network equipment, powering down, and recycling or reselling many of the components that are in that copper-based network. And then, fiber is just a better overall service. 70% less energy than copper. A really good news story on how we can better use energy to deliver broadband services to our customers.
Right. Yeah. And I think with this is beyond our scope for today, but yeah, a lot of energy needs are kind of heading toward data centers, and other um, areas of telecom in general. So, yeah, so that's an interesting, uh, critical component, the project. And then, one last thing, maybe this is like maybe bigger picture for this year, but abundantly clear, there's a lot of work on the plate at the moment, but as you kind of put it all together, what are the primary goals just for this year, as you work toward that 2020, 2030 goal?
Goals for 2026. Good, timely topic for January, Jeff.
Yes.
So, big goals is for us, we've got really good cadence and process for migrating our residential customers. You and I didn't talk very much about it today, but the scaling and migrating our enterprise customers is going to be a big focus in 2026. They require careful planning with these customers from a product and sales perspective to make sure that we're minimizing any customer disruptions. Many cases, the enterprise customers that we work with are a lot like AT&T, where you will have a conversation with them about where we're going with the turn down of our copper network, and they look at you and say, I have no idea what the copper circuits are even supporting in this administrative building. And so you actually have to go into the closet and work with them on, okay, this elevator is on copper, this one is still sitting on this. It actually is a little bit of a exploratory conversation with some of our larger customers, as it is when I go into AT&T administrative buildings and we work to define where the copper circuits are and what they're supporting. So that's going to be a really big focus for us in 2026. The second one I did talk about, how do we work across the industry and across my peers in the telecom area and the FCC to define the path and dates certain for us to fully exit TDM. What does that look like? How do we work together on that? If you follow a lot of the stirred, shaken, robo-calling mitigation efforts that have been coming out of the FCC, the right answer on that is not more investment in TDM. It's really moving to IP and getting off TDM. Better for everyone that is fighting robocalls, but also for how we have more intelligence and capabilities on the IP network. And then the last one, as we talked about, we are really going to start more decommissioning and powering down of the infrastructure. Selling more of that copper. We've already sold a lot of copper, and now I'm proud to say that I think the copper amount we've sold adds up to about 5 Eiffel Towers. And so really scaling that effort and putting that copper to better uses is another critical goal for 2026.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is interesting as when you're talking about, looking at these buildings, it's almost like as you look into the future, you're looking into the past, kind of like this telecom archaeology, if you will. It sounds like. So really good. All right. Well, we'll look forward to staying in touch with you and keeping tabs on the project and how things progress, moving forward. So I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. So Susan, thanks so much for your time and insights once again. Great to have you as our guest on this episode of the Signal Strength podcast. And just a quick special shout out to Pierre Landreau, who's editing this episode. So be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for future episodes of the Signal Strength podcast and other podcasts and interviews from the Light Reading team. So again, thanks for catching this episode. We'll see you next time. And Susan, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to talk to you.
Yep, you too.